Heads up, this theory takes into account the Stitch Wraith, the New Kid, and the Ultimate Guide, as well as my previous video. Make sure you're up to speed on those before proceeding. Let's talk Andrew. In my last video, I went over a long-running conspiracy I had about Andrew in which he served as the key to solving FNaF 4 and Midnight Motorist. However, there's a few points from that video that I probably should have emphasized a bit more. After reading through the comments, of which I appreciated the input from very much, it became clear that what I had failed to cover thoroughly was how Fazbear Frights is connected to the game timeline. While Scott did say upcoming novels would fill in blanks from the past around the time of Fazbear Frights' debut, that merely meant that we could potentially pick out little details that might help us when applied to the games. At the time, these details were considered parallels, as in one thing appearing in a story that was meant to symbolize and elaborate on something from the games. The most famous example of this was undoubtedly comparisons made between Golden Freddy and the Stitch Wraith in what became dubbed GoldenDuo. Although the idea of Golden Freddy having two spirits had existed prior to Pizzeria Simulator, it hadn't become all too popular yet. The premise of the Stitch Wraith was that it was an entity composed of two souls, Jake and Andrew, leading to many, including myself, assuming that this meant Golden Freddy was also composed of two individual souls. This idea worked surprisingly well with the theories that Golden Freddy was either the crying child or the fifth MCI victim, aka Cassidy, basically making it possible for both ideas to work together. However, this theory only held ground while we knew very little about the Stitch Wraith. Following the end of Fazbear Frights, Scott released the Ultimate Guide, a book which contained brand new details about the Fazbear Frights universe which we had failed to notice up until that point, ones that mainly tied the Stitch Wraith directly back to the game timeline. Something important about this iteration of the Freddy Files is that it isn't just filled with fan theories like prior versions, it actually contains some brand new information never revealed in any games or books. The most important example of this in terms of the books was the big reveal that a box of police evidence mentioned in the Stitch Wraith wasn't just any old box of evidence, it was evidence collected from the burned down Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Multiple other details from Fazbear Frights, such as the charred state of William in the Man in Room 1280, as well as the mentions of an old fire site by the police in the Stitch Wraith, suggest that there was some form of major fire in the Stitch Wraith universe. If the Stitch Wraith were really its own universe walled off from the main game timeline, one intended as a collection of parallels meant to complement the games rather than fit neatly with them, why would it be necessary to have details like these if not to establish the Stitch Wraith's place within the game timeline? While I could dig further into the canonicity of the Fazbear Frights series and probably will cover the topic in a future video, what this theory mainly concerns is the supposed parallels between the spirits of Golden Freddy and the Stitch Wraith, specifically Andrew and Cassidy. At the time of Andrew's debut, it was assumed that he was meant to serve as a parallel to Cassidy. Their supposed similarities included having black hair and being vengeful. However, while we know both of these to be factual characteristics of Andrew, we may have been wrong about one of those for Cassidy. Ever since the appearance of the Vengeful Spirit, or the one you should not have killed, in Ultimate Custom Night, we, the theorist community, have been looking for a name to fill that role, and the burden has usually fallen on Cassidy. Cassidy, being the fifth victim of the MCI and most probable identity of Golden Freddy, had always really fit the bill for most likely to have a grudge against William, though there's always been a few problems with this. Aside from the unanswered question of what would separate Cassidy from the other MCI victims, aka why she was the one William shouldn't have killed, we've also had the dilemma of why the Vengeful Spirit is referred to as a he, with Cassidy being a girl in all her known appearances.
He's here and always watching, the one you shouldn't have killed. I have seen him, the one you shouldn't have killed.
In fact, every canonical appearance we have from Cassidy, aside from assuming her to be the Vengeful Spirit, paints her as generally non-vengeful. We don't see much of Cassidy and her miscolored hair in the fourth closet, but we do see what appears to be a conversation between her and the crying child in their survival logbook. And while these appearances don't go into depth on Cassidy as much as they could, they do lack the inherent vengeance you'd expect from a so-called Vengeful Spirit. If Andrew were truly only a vengeful parallel to Cassidy, who doesn't seem to be all too vengeful at this point, you'd think Andrew would be relegated solely to the Stitch Wraith, but he actually appears in one other Fazbear Frights story. While the New Kid anomalously seems to be one of the only Fazbear Frights stories that cannot be canon to the games or the Stitch Wraith, what it manages to make us aware of is the body of a curly black-haired kid stuffed into the story's Fredbear Suit. When this story first dropped, we all thought that this black-haired child was definitely parallel to Cassidy, but with Andrew being an almost perfect match to the child, it's more likely that they are one and the same, though that still begs the question, why is Andrew stuffed into Fredbear? Well, I believe that question gets answered by another one asked by many of last video's commenters. What happened to Andrew after he died? Assuming that Andrew's observation experiments happened parallel to the week of FNaF 4, considering that he must have been kidnapped generally recently with how terrified the crying child is, William must have needed somewhere to hide Andrew's body once the experiments had concluded, and it just so happens that a space cleared up for him to do just that. Consider what major event would also happen around the time Andrew's experiments likely ended. The Bite of 83, an event in which the crying child was bitten by the Fredbear animatronic. Following this incident, Fredbear was likely decommissioned, making it the perfect vessel to conveniently hide Andrew's body. If Andrew were indeed stuffed into Fredbear following his death and the bite, this would explain why Fredbear has such a major role in UCN. If Andrew were indeed the one orchestrating UCN as a sort of hellscape for William, it would not at all be surprising to see him make an appearance as Fredbear at the thought of William eliminating Golden Freddy. Though isn't that a bit interesting that he'd only appear when specifically Golden Freddy was targeted? With Andrew being the Vengeful Spirit and having some interesting ties to Fredbear and Golden Freddy, some might ask what's stopping him from also being the 5th victim of the MCI and what that would mean for Cassidy. Well, while Cassidy may not be the Vengeful Spirit, we know for a fact that she still maintains the role of 5th MCI victim based on her grave with all the other MCI victims. We know for a fact that this grave does indeed belong to Cassidy based on the Ultimate Guide's hint that whatever name is hidden within the logbook also belongs to the grave, lining up with FNaF 3's animatronic heads at the endings. With Cassidy maintaining her role as Golden Freddy and the 5th MCI victim, the average consensus has been that she was stuffed into the Golden Freddy suit during the missing children's incident. However, something a lot of people like to point out is that Andrew was also a part of the MCI. In places like Toy Chica's high school years cutscenes and the Curse of Dreadbear graves, William's number of victims has gone from 6 to 7. A more prominent example of this was in Into the Pit, where Oswald witnessed a warped interpretation of the missing children's incident, finding 6 children involved rather than 5. It's become assumed that Andrew is that newly added 6th victim of the MCI, but that would interfere with his death happening in 1983. At least, that's if he was even a victim of the MCI. Andrew was indeed at the missing children's incident, or at least his soul was in the safe room when it happened. It turns out that just prior to the MCI, another incident known as the Springlock failure would result in all Springlock suits being temporarily decommissioned and relocated to what is most likely Freddy Fazbear's Pizza's safe room.
Hello. There's been a slight change of company policy concerning use of the suit. Don't. After learning of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees. Safety is top priority at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which is why the classic suits are being retired to an appropriate location while being looked at by our technicians.
While Andrew's body may have been removed from the Fredbear suit prior to 1985, after all, Kelsey wouldn't have been able to climb into the suit in the new kid if Andrew's body were still there. His soul definitely still lingered within the suit, technically making him present for the MCI. Now, something I'd promised I'd cover here in the last video was Andrew's connections to Golden Freddy, but what I didn't say in that video is that he isn't just connected to Golden Freddy. He is the second soul. Andrew and Cassidy are the GoldenDuo of Golden Freddy. The male spirit of Golden Freddy was never the crying child, but was always Andrew. While I may have said earlier that Cassidy was stuffed into the Golden Freddy suit during the MCI, that was only a half-truth. While Freddy's may have had its own Golden Freddy suit sporting a black bow tie and hat, this was not a new animatronic. Cassidy wasn't stuffed into a soulless Golden Freddy suit. She was stuffed into the repurposed Fredbear suit, binding her soul with Andrew to form the entity that we know of as Golden Freddy. Throughout the years, the lines between Golden Freddy and Fredbear have slowly become blurrier. Things like Fredbear defending Golden Freddy in UCN, a Golden Freddy themed nightmare being the counterpart of Nightmare Fredbear, and even this being the canonical design of Fredbear in the novel trilogy. Following the Bite of 83, Fredbear's Family Diner must have promptly closed closed down from the bad publicity, leaving Fredbear's springlock suits without a home. To avoid the bad publicity of the Fredbear character, he must have been redesigned with a new black hat and bow tie into Golden Freddy. Same goes for his removal from Fredbear and Friends, instead being replaced by Freddy and Friends on Tour as seen in Security Breach. Following the MCI, Cassidy and Andrew would become bound together as Golden Freddy with the help of Charlotte. With Andrew's body having already been removed from the suit, Andrew became the internal spirit just like he was in the Stitch Wraith, while Cassidy took control of the body. It's no surprise that Andrew didn't remember Cassidy when he was in the Stitch Wraith with Jake, considering that he could hardly remember what William had even done to him in the first place. Isn't it interesting? The two characters we thought to be parallels of each other turn out to not just exist in the same universe, but to be souls inhabiting Golden Freddy with each other. If you're still caught up on questions like what's with Andrew's alligator connections, what happened to Golden Freddy during Follow Me, and most importantly, what happened to Cassidy during the events of the Stitch Wraith, stay tuned for supposed part 3. Also, if you're still interested in more of how the Fazbear Frights universe connects to the games, especially including more details about the new kid, stay tuned for a supposed video on that somewhere in the future. No promises though. Anyways, thank you all for watching. As always, I really appreciate the input and arguments you guys leave in the comments. Really helps me figure out what to focus on better in the next video, so make sure to voice your criticism. And as always, take care everybody.